Hello, everybody. My name's Pam from Around the Table Yarns, for those of you who are watching later. This is our, is this our second Granny Square project? Second Granny Square project. For those of you who've done the first Granny Square project, the bag, I promise I'm going to do a video of how I attached my handles. It's coming. I just got delayed. So I'll put out a post when I get that up. But this month and next month, we're going to be doing the Hygge burst pillow by Mallory Krall. Is the designer. She goes by Mallory Krall. Her name is Mallory Krall. She does have it as a free pattern on her website, on her blog, which you can link to through Ravelry, or if you want a printed pattern, you can buy the printed pattern and get it in PDF form, but it's exactly the same free on her blog, okay? Excuse me. So this version of a granny that she shows she calls it a sunburst. So it starts as a circle and then it gets squared off. I'm going to switch to my camera here real quick. Share. And then here it goes. So this is what the pillow looks like. It has been designed for these squares to fit an 18 by 18 pillow form. You can also, using 16 squares. You could also use 9 squares and it would make a 14 by 14 pillow form. That being said, this was designed, you could use these granny squares for anything. You can put them together as a blanket. This project for her started as a blanket. And then she designed the pillow to use the leftover scraps from the blanket, okay? So this month, I'm going to talk about how to make the granny, all the different, it's a 4-round granny. And then next month, we're going to do the join as you go method for joining the squares, which didn't work well last time for the bag, but this is a perfect project to learn that technique. So we'll do that next month, joining them. But today we'll talk about how to make all the different parts of the granny and how to square it off. It's a lot of fun. So she used in her pattern, and she lists 13 different colors. This is a great scrap busting project. It's done in worsted weight with a 5mm hook. And I will say I did have to use a 5mm hook. When I use worsted weight, I tend to go down to a 4mm. I did not get gauge at all. She was absolutely right. A 5mm is what worked. But if you're not getting it to fit a pillow form, it doesn't really matter as long as you're happy with the fabric. If you're making a blanket, whatever yarn, whatever hook you want to use is totally fine, okay? You could make these squares as long as they're all the same size and turn them into that market bag that we made last month. You can make 13 of them, lay them out the same way, join them, and do it that way if you wanted to, okay? So I played around a lot with this pattern. First I tried it in one color just to try the different techniques as I wanted to test it. I think it's beautiful in one color. There's a lot of texture. I'm going to kind of tilt it up a little. You've got puff stitches here and cluster stitches here. So it does have some dimension to it. I think it shows up really nice in one color. This is the coastal cotton from Queensland that we carry. It's a worsted weight smooth cotton. This is the first one I did on a 4mm, a G hook, and I did not get the size that she recommended, okay? But I'm gonna come back to that if you end up with a different gauge. So I think it looks great as a solid color. And then I started playing with some other colors of the coastal cotton. And I did kind of a little bit of a fade, which I kind of liked. Each round being a different color. This one's a little easier to see. Maeve was very proud of me for playing with colors. And then Maeve had the audacity to ask me, what is that color grouping called? And I said, I don't know. I didn't take your class. I don't know what that color grouping is called. I'm going to put these next to each other. In her pattern, she starts with a chain 5 that turns into a circle. I did this one just like she did. It does leave a little bit of a hole. This one I did magic ring. So you can see the difference. There's no wrong way to do it. You can do either one. With the magic ring, you can tighten up that hole so that you don't have a hole at all. When you chain 5, you can snug it a little bit, but you're always going to have a hole. Okay. So it's totally up to you which method. I'm going to do it as I demonstrate magic ring, but please know that you can do it as a chain 5. Previously, we've done it as a chain 4, but we are going to be putting 15 stitches into that circle, so a chain 5 is needed. Okay. Let me just look at my notes here. Feel free to ask questions as we go along here.
I have a question. When is I didn't realize there was a second class. When is that?
It will be a month. I'm looking at the calendar here. A month from today, so April. Hold on, I have a calendar.
Sorry, I thought it was a quick.
No, totally fine. It'll be April 24th. We'll do you'll have the month to make all the squares, and then next on the 24th, I'll show you how to do the join as you go method. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
For making the pillow. So just know that you don't have to make the pillow. You can just make the squares and do whatever you want with it. It's totally up to you. So
can I ask a second question?
Yeah, ask away.
I'm just curious why you chose that yarn as opposed to,
So I wanted to do it. I wanted to do something that showed off a lot of colors. And originally I wanted to do it with the new printed version of this cotton. But ultimately I didn't like the way it looked done in the round. I like it better in back and forth rows. I could have done it in Callista. I could do it in Callista, which I had plenty of, but I did the last project in Callista, so I figured I'd switch it up and use the coastal cotton for this one. And since I'm making shop samples for the shop, trying to have a different sample in different yarns was my goal. But you could do it in any worsted weight. You could do it. I know Ingrid is using some leftover wool she has, all worsted weight, and she's just kind of making it up. You can make smaller squares, larger squares, as long as you have similar weight. But I will say these squares eat a lot of yarn. The puff stitches take a lot of yarn. The cluster stitches take a lot of yarn. So one of the things I was going to do, and I didn't get a chance today, was I've got it broken down in each round to tell you. I was going to try to figure out how much so you could figure out how much yarn you needed. I was going to, in the coastal cotton, here's how much you would need, this many grams for this. So you could get an idea. I know how much one square weighs, but how much does each round take was my, and I think I will still do that, and I can put it up on the website when I post the video. Okay. So I played with these, and then I decided I was going to make, and I think the pillow will probably end up coming to my house. So I picked not the 13 colors that she had. I picked a much smaller palette, and I just picked, because these will go in my guest room or have these colors in them. And then I'm going to use this darker gray as my joining color. So I'm just going to randomly pick round to round. I'm not even really going to keep track. I'm just going to pick and make all of my squares a different mixture of this. You could do them all solids. You could, anything you wanted. There really isn't a right or a wrong here. Okay. So this is how my squares will end up looking, is a combination of all of these colors. And then I'll use this color as my join as you go color at the end. Okay. And that is a monochromatic, Maeve said, color palette. I promised I would say that. Okay. So we're going to start here. I tried to have one of these going at each stage, so you don't have to watch me go all the way around. And let's see if I actually ended up doing that. So let's start. Let me just make sure I didn't have anything else in my notes that I wanted to cover beforehand. I have plenty of things to say as it goes. I will say I do like the way she joins her rounds is a little unique. So you're gonna learn something there. So it makes the starting of the round a little different. So you might think, I actually thought it might be a typo. I looked it up, but then I went on to read and I actually watched her video. She does a video of this as well on her website. And she explains why she does that. It makes a really nice invisible join as you complete the round. Okay, so let's zoom in here. So we're going to start with a magic ring. And if you're, I'm going to change colors on this, but no, I will point out what you do when you are not changing colors. And she actually does a video if you're not changing colors. Whoops. I'm going to get that right. So again, I'm using a worsted weight cotton on a 5mm hook. All right. I'm starting with a magic ring. And I'm going to start with a chain 2. And then I'm going to be putting 15 double crochets into the ring. So typically when you do a double crochet, it's a chain of 3. But we're starting with a chain 2, and you'll see why as we come around and we join. So into the ring, now you could chain 5 and then slip stitch into the first chain to create a circle and then make your stitches into that circle. So this, your first chain that you do, whether it be a chain 1, a chain 2, a chain 3, counts as a stitch. So this counts as my first double crochet. So I need to do 15 more because I'm working with a total of 16. So 1, and I'm not going to do all of them because I have one already completed, but I'll make 15 more double crochets. Remember to count this chain 2 right here counts as a double crochet. So this plus 15 more gets you to here. Okay. So I haven't tightened up my magic ring yet. It will still tighten. Let me just double check that I actually did them all. 1. I'm going to count the posts. You could count the stitches across the top. Oh, you can actually see that pretty well. I will do that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, and then my chain 2 at the end there is 16. So here's how she does a join. Typically, when you're coming around, you would slip stitch into the top of your, whatever your first stitch is there, which would be the chain 2. She actually has you skipping that chain 2 and slip stitching into the top of the very first actual double crochet. So I don't know if we've talked about this before or not. When you're working in the round and you're trying to figure out what the top of a stitch is, and I know this is kind of bright. So here's the very first double crochet right here. This only applies when you're working in the round like this. If you're turning it over and going back and forth, it does not apply. But the top of the stitch is always just to the right of the post of the stitch. So there's the double crochet. And right here is the top of the first double crochet. So that's where I'm going to slip stitch into. I'm going to skip the 2 chains there. And here's what happens when you do that. So slip stitch into the top. Pull it through. It just brings it close. The slip stitch that you just made, which is right here, becomes the top of that chain 2. So it's still, you still have 16. You could count these all the way around. You would still have 16, even though I've covered up that chain 2. I've covered it up with a slip stitch, and that slip stitch counts as a stitch there. Okay. So when you're all said and done, you will have 16 double crochets, and this one might be a little easier without the glare. The next round, and we talked about this last month, about slip stitching across to weave your ends away. The only time I'm going to recommend you don't do that is this round right here. And here's why. We're going to have to make puff stitches, which I'll show you in just a second, into the tops of each of these stitches. If I were to slip stitch my ends over, that would be going into the tops of those stitches. It will take up space, and the puff stitch is going to require a lot of room. So I don't recommend doing a slip stitch. I recommend leaving your tail, and I actually, on this one, I can't even tell where my beginning is. There's my chain 2. Oh, right here. I just took the end and I just wove it down in here and trimmed it away. Okay. So if you're changing colors, you can now, your next round can start in any of these tops of these double crochets. If you're not changing colors, let me pull this back out. If you're not changing colors, you'll slip stitch into the top of that double crochet. And then you will chain 1. And you will start making your puff stitch into that same space. Okay. That's if you're not changing colors. If you are changing colors, and let's do that here. You'll start with a slip stitch on your hook, slip knot on your hook. And you will slip stitch into any of the tops of these double crochets to join it. And you will chain 1. And where you have slip stitch, right there is where you're going to make your first puff stitch in the same space. Okay. So far we've not had to use any markers. And this came up in class this morning. You know, often I tell you to mark your first stitch so you know where to go. You really don't need them with this. Even if you are not changing colors, because the stitches are so big, there is an obvious end to your round. Also, what's nice about this pattern is every round, except for the very last round that squares it off, is all 16 stitches. So you don't have to remember different numbers each time you're going around. You're always going to have 16 of something. Okay? So a puff stitch. A puff stitch is, it's going in and out of a stitch without completing a stitch several times. You can go in any number of times. The more times you go in and out of a stitch and yarn over, the fatter it's going to be, okay? This one has you going in and out of a stitch 3 times, which is a pretty good amount. You could probably squeeze one more in there without it being too stuffed in there, but this one requires 3. So this is round 2, and it starts with a chain 1, and then we are going to be making this puff stitch starts with the yarn over. Okay, I'm going to go back into the stitch, grab my working yarn, and come up. I have 3 loops on my hook. I'm going to repeat that 2 more times. Yarn over, go into the stitch, grab a yarn, come up. I have 5 loops on my hook. Yarn over, go back into the stitch, grab the yarn, come back. I have 7 loops on my hook. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. When I have 7 loops on my hook, yarn over and pull through all 7. Now here's how you make that and then you finish it with a chain one, which kind of brings it all together. And that's a puff stitch. When you're making a puff stitch, and now we're going to go into the very next top of the double crochet, you might have to move that puff stitch over a little bit so that you can see where your next stitch is. When you go in, start with a yarn over, go into the stitch, bring your yarn up. Don't keep this very low. I know we've talked before about being a lifter or keeping it close to the actual work. With this one, you actually want to be a little bit of a lifter so that it's not tight. So that when you do that final yarn over and pull through, you have room to pull that hook through. If you keep it really close to the work and make these stitches on the tighter side, it will be really hard to pull it through. Okay, so I'm going to lift it up just a little bit. And I believe in the notes she tells you to pull it up like to the height of a half double crochet. So that just gives, it doesn't have to be super high, but don't bring it super tight. Okay, so I've done it once, twice, 3 times. And your check is you've got 7 loops on your hook. 2, 4, 6, 7. Okay, so now it slides smoothly. I can yarn over, twist your hook down to pull it through, and it should come through all of those loops. And if it doesn't, stop and do it over. And then finish with the chain one. Finishing with the chain one is critical because in the next round, you're going to be making your stitches into that chain space that the chain one is making. Okay. So now we're going to go into the next one and we're going to make 16 of these puff stitches. So if your puff stitch kind of hangs over, make sure you're getting into all of it. We talked this morning, I'm just going to do a few here while I talk, about maybe working halfway through, and then doing a quick count to make sure you were on track. Turn over, go through all of them, and then chain one. Okay. Oops, there we go. Somewhere in this round, it's going to start to get a little curled. 2, 3, all the way through, and that's okay. That's normal because we're putting a lot of yarn in a small space. Okay, so you're going to continue all the way around, and I've got one here that's a little further along. So I'm just going to double check. I think I have one more to make, so I'm going to just double check here. So I want to have 16 puffs. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. I have one more to make, and I have one more top of my stitch right there. And then over, up, and over, up, and then over, up. So you can see I still have room. I could go over many more times. And you know what, I will. I'll just show you what that looks like. And you can do it as many times as you can fit your hook in there. And what that does to, it just makes it puffier. So you would add more dimension, more texture to it if you wanted to do it that way. Or on any, that's just a way you can adapt the pattern. Or if you have thinner yarn, slightly thinner yarn, and it doesn't look full enough, add a couple more. It's not going to change your stitch count. It's not going to throw anything off. You can totally personalize it that way. Great. Okay. Go through and finish with your chain one. And then the way you're going to join is instead of joining in the top of that chain one that we started with, or even in the top of the puff stitch, remember to finish with a chain one, is you're going to slip stitch in the space between the first puff stitch and the second puff stitch. So slip stitch into that space, and it gives you a nice, fairly invisible join. Okay. Now, if you wanted to, because our next round is going to be going into the spaces, not into the tops of the stitches. If you wanted to slip stitch some of your end away, you could. I can go over this. As long as I'm not going into the space, I'm going into the stitch. Just do 3 or 4 of them here. Now, if you're staying in the same color, you obviously wouldn't do that. You would just slip stitch and stop there.
So Pam, I've never done that. Does that though add to the size when you do that?
So it adds a little bit, it adds a hint of both. And I will say that as long as if you do this and you're changing colors, as long as you don't do this in the same spot in each round, you will never know. So for when I do the next color of this, I'm going to start it not in the same spot because then my weaving away would end up in the same spot. I would start it here. It really doesn't add, it's a very minimal amount. And I just do it for maybe 3 or 4 stitches. And then I could weave this away just a little bit down the side and trim it. It saves a lot of weaving time, particularly on the pillow like this, because I don't care about the backside. I will probably just tie a few knots and cut it because I'm not going to be looking at the backside. If you were looking at the backside, you know, you could weave it away and work it back into the project. Okay. So I feel like it doesn't add a considerable amount of bulk. And I did it in all of these, and I really don't feel like you can see anywhere. So it comes out nice. If you were not changing colors, you would slip stitch into the space between those two. And then you would chain, we're on to round 3, you would chain 2 for our next round. But I'm going to be changing colors here. Let's go to the dark. So I'm going to start with a slip knot. You weren't changing colors, you would have slip stitched in there with your current yarn, and then you would chain 2. Okay. And then round 3 is a cluster stitch. And I don't know if you can see, if I turn it sideways, you might be able to see. It is starting to kind of curl. It is not laying flat. At the end, this next round, it is definitely not going to lay flat. That is totally normal. What will make it lay flat is our final round that squares it off, kind of pulls all these extra stitches out and helps it lay flat. So don't worry that your tension is too tight if it's curling. It is normal for it to curl at this stage. Kind of looks like a little potato chip. Okay. So that's all good. Okay. So now round 3, we're going to make a cluster stitch. A cluster stitch is like a puff stitch, except that we are going to do a little bit more of the stitch before we go in and we do it again. So with the puff stitch, we yarned over, we dove into the stitch, we grabbed the working yarn, and then we did it again. With a cluster stitch, I'm going to take the extra step, like for a double crochet, I'm going to yarn over and I'm going to pull through 2 loops. But I am not going to finish the double crochet. I'm just going to stop right there, and that's what I'm going to repeat. Yarn over, dive in, grab the yarn and come back, yarn over, pull through 2. So now I've got 3 of them going. Yarn over, dive in, grab it, yarn over, pull through 2. Okay, and you want to do this until there are, I want to say 5 loops, but let me just double check that. Or double crochets. Chain 2, yeah, 1 more. Yarn over, pull through 2. So when you've got 5 loops on your hook, so we have started but not completed those double crochets, yarn over, pull through all of them. So you're completing all of them at the same time, and then chain 2 this time. So it looks a little bit different than a puff stitch because you have made more of each stitch before you've gone in and done it again. We've done half of a double crochet, half of a double crochet, half of a double crochet, and then finished them all. The puff stitch, all you're doing is going into the stitch, pulling up yarn, going into the stitch, pulling up yarn. We're not making the next part of the stitch, okay? So it's a little taller and it looks a little different. So this we're going to do all the way around into the spaces between each puff stitch, and then finish it with a chain 2. So yarn over, go in, yarn over, pull through 2. 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 I should have 5 loops. The first one, because it's got a chain 2, ends up looking like it has an extra. Don't worry about it. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 double crochets there, but 5 loops. Yarn over, pull through all of those, and finish with a chain 2. And you do need that chain 2 because the final squaring round, you need to go into those spaces. Okay. We'll do it one more time, and then I'll show one that's, you know what, I didn't actually finish. So I'm going to finish this one as I go so we can get to the next spot. So I can show you how to join. Chain 2. 2. So if you're changing colors, this is a nice assembly line project because then you only have one thing to remember as you do each round. And you're not trying to remember what to do on each stitch. Right. Go through 2, over 2, over 2. And I quit counting. I just know that when I have 5 loops, it's time to stop. Just like on the puff stitch, when I had 7 loops, I know it was time to stop, which makes it a nice, easy to remember pattern. So while I'm finishing up this round, does anybody have any questions?
So when you say assembly line, you mean you do all the centers and then all the one around it?
Yeah. So I would do, and this is probably what I'll do. I'm just going to mix and match. I'm going to do a bunch of centers. So I have 16 centers, and then I'll mix and match colors, and I'll do all of my puff stitch round, and then I'll go through and do all of my cluster round, and then I'll do all of my squaring off rounds all at the same time. If you're doing all in one color, obviously you're going to do square by square. But if you're changing colors, it's a nice way to go. Let's see if I can take this one back so you don't have to watch me do all those clusters. I had big plans to finish this today and that just didn't happen. So I can show you how to join, how to finish off the round here. There we go. Okay. So double check, you're going to end up with 16 cluster stitches, and that first one is going to look a little bigger. We talked about this morning. I thought about maybe only doing, because you've got the chain 2 coming out of it, maybe only doing 3, but I think with the joining, it really does kind of cover up that chain 2, so I don't think you need to change anything. All right, so I need to have 16. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. I am going to slip stitch in between the first 2 clusters into the space. And I'm actually going to, because my next round is going to go into the space again, I'm going to weave away a little, just slip stitch it away. So it's still a little wonky as far as not laying flat, totally fine, because we have shoved a lot of yarn in there. Okay. But you've got a nice circle. All right. If you were staying with the same color after you slip stitched in here, your final round is going to start with a chain 3 after you've slip stitched. Okay. So I'm starting with a new color to finish off this round. So I slip stitched to join, and I'm going to chain 3. So if chain 1 or chain 2 did us a double, chain 3 is actually, we're going to do a triple on this, which you don't use very often. I haven't used very often in crochet. All right, so this is how we're going to square it off. This is round 4, and we're going to be creating corners and sides out of our circle. And that's what's going to end up pulling this into a flatter shape. So while it's wonky now, it's gonna sort itself out. So this chain 3 that I just made, counts as our first triple crochet. So a triple, if you've never done it, starts with 2 yarn overs. I'm going to go into the space, grab the yarn and come up. I'm going to yarn over, I'm going to pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. It's a very tall stitch. Okay, so now I have 2 triples. I need 1 more. Yarn over, pull through 2, pull through 2, pull through 2. So it starts with 2 yarn overs, and you yarn over, pull through 2 3 times, which is what makes it a triple. Okay, now I'm going to chain 3, 2, 3, and into the same space, I'm going to put 3 more triples. I'm creating a corner space. So yarn over twice, which you will forget to do because we don't do triples very often. 1, 2, 3. One, 2, 3, and 1 more, all in the same space. Okay. So what we've created here is the corner, our first corner, to square off our granny. Okay, now here's how she takes a circle and turns it into a square. In the next space, I'm going to do 3 double crochets. I'm not going to chain at the end. The only time you're going to do chains is the 3 chains between your 3 triples in the 4 corners. Otherwise, there's no chaining in between going from space to space. So I'm going to do 3 doubles, which is very reminiscent of the grannies we've done it previously. And 3. So a double crochet is a little shorter than a triple. Okay, so we're starting to kind of create a line going across. In the next space, I'm going to do 3 half doubles, which are a little shorter. A half double starts with a yarn over, go into the stitch, yarn over, pull through all 3 loops. It's a little taller than a single, not quite as tall as a double. We'll do 3 of those. And hopefully you can kind of see where we're headed here. So now my other corner is going to be over here. I need to bring it back up a little. So in the next space, I'm going to do 3 doubles again. It's going to be the mirror. I've done exactly half of a side here. I've got triples, double, half double, go back to double, go back to triple. So in the next space, 3 double crochets. And I'm just going to go over my end from my previous round here. Okay. So no, I did not chain in between my spaces. So triples, double, half double, double again, and now I'm back to making another corner space. So in this space, I'll do 3 triples, 3 triples, a chain 3, and 3 triples again. Yarn over. And then I'm going to go over my end there. 1, 2, 3. Double yarn over. 1, 2, 3. Double yarn over. 2. 3. So I've got 3 triples, chain 3. This is my corner space. And 3 more triples into the same space. Get it back in. 1, 2, 3. Double yarn over. 1, 2, 3. Double yarn over. And 1, 2. All right, so hopefully you can see what we've made here is we've got 2 corners and 1 whole side. So we've taken this curve, and by using different height stitches, I don't know why that looks so funny though. Using different height stitches, it does have a little bit of a dip here, but I will tell you that when we do the join as you go round, it will pull that up a little, but you end up going all the way around and you have straight sides. So you repeat from here. Three doubles into the next space. Three half doubles in the next space. So this is the center of our second side. Now we're working back towards a corner, so 3 doubles again. And making another corner. 3 triples, start with a double yarn over. 2, 2, 2. 2, 2, 2. And 2, 2, 2. Chain 3. And if these start to fill up your space, you can slide those triples over to give yourself a little more room. That's the nice thing about going into a space. You can really slide them over. So now we've gone halfway around. Then you come all the way around. Last month when we did the granny square bag, we started with part of a corner. In this granny, because we're taking a circle and trying to get into a granny, you make a full corner to begin, and then we slip stitch to join into not the first chain 3, but again the top of the first triple, slip stitch to join, and it brings it all together. I'm going to slip stitch across here just to get my end locked in. And we've got nice spaces between our clusters. Some are double, some are half double, some are triple. Oh. We're just going to pretend I did it. All right. So when we come back next month, we're going to be using these spaces, which are very familiar to us from a granny. We've got a corner space, bigger than we're used to, but, and we'll be doing a join as you go. So it'll be another row of granny joining. We'll be making a granny here and a cluster stitch here and a cluster stitch here at the same time. So we'll do a final round of each of them and joining them at the same time. So I know last month it just wasn't a good project to do join as you go. This is a great project to do join as you go, which you can use on lots of projects. So even if you're not, if you just want to make, I think Carolyn this morning was talking about just making posters like this. She's still going to tune in because learning the join as you go method is a nice method to do. Now, earlier I had talked about that when I did my first one, I was stubborn. I did it on a 4 hook and I did not get the recommended, the 4 3/4. I got just over 4 for my square. What I could do if I wanted to, because now this is very much like a granny that we're used to, I could, if I wanted to make a pillow and I wanted to fit an 18 by 18 pillow form, I could go around and do a round of like single crochet granny all the way around to make it a little bigger. If I wanted to, or I could maybe do the last round in a slightly bigger hook to adjust it. You could also just keep going from here and just continue to make it a granny bigger, bigger, and bigger that would have a sunburst center. I mean, the possibility, you can make the puff stitches bigger. If you're using a bulkier yarn, you might want to make them, maybe you only go in there twice because that would be plenty. It would be nice and puffy if you're using a bulky yarn. The technique is definitely applicable to all kinds of patterns, but I think it's a lot of fun. I think this one I did is, yeah, that one I can take.
Pam, if you did it in one color,
yeah,
would you do the whole thing in one color, or you just have multiple squares in different colors?
You could do either way. If you go to Ravelry, several people have made this. More people have made the blanket, and you will see examples. Oh, I could probably pull that up and show it to you. More people have done the blanket than the pillow because that came out first. And you would see examples. Let me stop sharing that. Go to blanket. I have to talk myself through this another time. Sure. Okay, can you see this?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let me see. Let's look at this one. So she just used a bunch of scrap yarn. Each of them are just one color. Some of them are variegated, and you could put it all together. Let's see. Somebody here. Oh, I like the way she did hers too. So she did It looks like a color changing yarn for the center, and then just did her final round in one color, which I'm guessing will probably also be her joining color. She didn't share that picture yet. Let me see if I can find one that's all one color. I like people who add a lot of photos. So she did. These changed colors every round. Has a very scrappy look, which I kind of like. So it just depends on what you're going for. Let me go to the pillow pattern, see if anybody did it. More monochromatic. You can also look through a lot of her patterns. She's got, definitely has a style. I like her use of color. It just, she has a nice twist to it. Here's the color. So here's if you did every square the same. So this is what we'll end up getting at the end, and then you fold it to make the pillow. So she did every round the same, which has a nice look to it. That's how I did one of the granny bags last month. Let's see if anybody did solids. I don't see anybody doing solids. But you could certainly do, look at her other projects. This, her Astrid pillow was another one I thought about doing. It's similar. Getting the worsted. See if anybody did solids. Here we go. So I used yarn that had some tonal yarns and did them all the same, all the same, and then joined different colors together. So you absolutely could. Oh God, it looks like she spun her yarn too. These crazy people. These people have too much time. This is the rabbit hole I get sucked down into to see how other people have done things.
Looks like a lot of them use the last round, the squaring off round is the same color as the joining round.
You absolutely could. And I thought about doing that with this one, but I decided I wanted to use one extra color. So you absolutely could. You could do, the first 3 rounds, the circle rounds all in one color, and then do your squaring off round and your joining round in a second color, which I think would be fabulous. Almost something a little bit like this. So looks like the last round and the joining round are the same color. And that would be really fun. So if you want to use up scraps, this is a great way because it does use a lot of yarn. Or you can do something really inexpensive with the Callista. Like I said, since I have all of these different pieces and parts done, I'm gonna weigh my overall granny and then give you the breakdown. I'll do that while the video is uploading, and I'll put it up on the site with the video. So you'll have an idea of just how much yarn that round 2 and 3 really do eat, or 3 and 4 really do eat. And you can get a sense of, oh, I have this is how many squares I can make. You'll have an idea if you're using stuff or if you need to buy stuff. Callista would be a great, because it's so inexpensive. You could absolutely do it in something like soft fun. If you have a lot of soft fun, you might have to add an extra granny round if you're trying to make the pillow. So if you're trying to make a size that fits, you're going to have to, continue to do rounds, which I'm happy to help you with if you need to get to a certain size, or you can make your own pillow to stuff in there. It doesn't, if you're using a pre-made pillow form though, you kind of have to go by that to make it work.
Where do you usually buy a pillow form?
I usually get them. I save like my Joann coupons. And usually I'll get, like, I happen to have one because they usually come in a 2-pack, and I buy them from Joanne. And I'll use a coupon or when they have them on sale. Often they'll have like a buy one, get one or something. But they're pretty inexpensive to do it that way. So were there any other questions?
Are you still recording?
I'm going to stop here in a second.